So if you're just logging in, most of you guys have done this. Go ahead and rename yourself, put your location on there as well so we can kind of see who's here, where you're from, what that looks like. Before we kind of jump into the conversation today and start looking at our discussion there, I'd love to walk through an idea with you guys about my life a little bit and where I have seen things in this area of every community come together. For me, sometimes I latch onto this idea of every community being cross ethnicity culture lines and having this moment of, okay, my culture and your culture. And sometimes it's not so much that either. For me, I was on a missions trip in Ireland, and I was the first mission trip I've done as an adult without students with me. And I got to go and just be a part of the trip and not worrying about how do I take care of those kids and keep them safe, right? And I end up in this area in Northern Ireland in a guitar shop, Avalon Guitars, with the guy who owns it. If you're a music person, apparently Avalon Guitars are amazing. I've never really known that, but I'm not a music guy. We were there sitting with him, hearing the story of his life living through the troubles in the 80s in Northern Ireland when the Protestant pastors and the Catholic priests were literally sending people out to kill each other. If you're unfamiliar with that, it got to the point in Belfast where they built a wall to separate the churches across the city. And if you went across that line and across that wall, your life was at risk. And this is the same people, same families, same ethnicities, but different culture lines there. That's in the 80s. Then here I am in 2019, sitting in a room, leading a worship conference with Alpha as I'm sitting in the back running the slides on the computer, and my friends are doing the music. And I look up and I notice a pastor and a priest with their arms around each other, worshiping God together. And I slowly started thinking through that and putting the pieces together of, man, that's really cool. That's awesome to see. Wait, that guy's pretty old. No, they both are. Oh, they were leaders in their church in the 80s. These were the guys who were pushing this idea during the times of the trouble of, we need to go after them. They were the ones that were actually actively sanctioning the killing of other people in their community. And here they are together, reconciled, arms around each other, worshiping God together, because we can come together on these kind of things. To me, that was the first moment where I sat there and really was humbled that God is bigger than our problems in a way that I can't comprehend, because these guys should have been at war still. These guys should have been, if nothing else, holding a grudge of, you've killed people I loved. And yet we're worshiping God together. And so it's a start for me to enter into this space, to remind myself as we do enter into this space today, that it is easy to lock down into what every community means in our heart and our mind of being a clear-cut line, when sometimes, because of reconciliation, those lines have been blurred. And that's an amazing thing to see those things start to be less definable. But also, sometimes we have to look beyond the easy option of where the conversation needs to be had. So that's my hope for you today, to start there. But before we get going, I want you guys to ask yourself this question and maybe write it down in the chat today as we get going. what or how have you built bridges with youth leaders in different cultures in your experience? That's a little bit of mine, is starting to have that conversation there, led that back to Reno for me in Nevada. But how have you built bridges with youth leaders in different cultures in your life, in your area? So go ahead and write that in the chat this morning. We'll give you a little bit to think about that and do that. And I am going to hand things off to Kevin this morning to kick that off.
Welcome, everybody. I am so excited to be here, so excited for who's going to be sharing with us on the idea of reaching youth from every community, reaching youth leaders from every community as well. Seth Stevens, I've known for a while, for probably about 10 years ago. Is that how long?
I believe so.
There we go. And Seth, I just want to say to you, ya te.
Hey.
Which, did I do it right?
Yes.
Awesome. That is welcome in Navajo. And that's just, with that, being able to share the same language, at least try. My goodness, I don't know if I slaughtered that or not, but I'm excited for Seth and sharing his story, as well as how he's been able to work in reaching every community within who he is. And so, Seth, could you just share with us really the question, who are you and what is it that you do?
Yes, I am Seth Stevens. I'm Navajo from Winter Rock, Arizona. I work now with Hutchcraft Ministries. I work in the capacity as a On Eagle's Wings leadership coordinator. So I just helping with the discipleship program that we do as a gap year for 9 months. Before this, I worked with Chuck Harper in Navajo capital in the Southwest. I worked as a missionary there for youth, but also as a director for Christ for Native Youth for a while there too. I think that's how I met a lot of you. But I've just enjoyed doing youth ministry, reaching out through evangelism, discipleship, and working better together with every community. So it's just been great.
Awesome. And so, Seth, looking at this whole picture, my dream is the idea of every tribe, every tongue, every nation to be in heaven together and being separate people, but all loving and worshiping Jesus. And so looking at that and with our networks, where do we begin in connecting with communities different than our own?
I think this is a good conversation. I think this is how it starts, is having a conversation about it. I think there are a lot of communities out there that are not urban, but they do have like urban problems. And I'm talking specifically for reservations that kind of get overlooked because they're in rural areas and you don't really see a lot of youth, but they are there, just scattered around. And most times it's a 3-hour drive just to pick up youth just for the night and to drop off. So I think that's what it's going to look like, for at least Native America, is having to go out and reach those individuals, youth leaders, youth that are on reservations that are so far spread apart. And again, rural areas, but have very urban problems.
And so looking at that, if I were to go in to connect with somebody from a different culture or different community, what would you have me do first, or have me prepare in that capacity?
Yeah, well, I think, you even saying hello in my language means a lot. I think that's a great start. If you're going to go to any community, is to at least learn some of the language. You don't have to master it. And surprisingly, on a lot of reservations I've been to, or settlements with Native people, they love the attempt. So even if you don't say it correctly, just the attempt alone shows that you're trying to connect with them on a relational basis. So I think that's where it should start, is educating yourself on which community you're going into, because there's over 500 tribes, in the United States that having to learn 500 languages is kind of impossible. But I think that's kind of because we're all kind of together in the United States, that we have to go into each reservation not thinking that it's the same as the last one we came from. So I think that's just it. Educating yourself on Native American culture, but also on who they are and which community are you located in. Because most times, if you just look on your map, you can find historically which tribes resided there before they were wiped out or before they were pushed into settlements. So you can just look there and see the history. To start. That's to start. And of course, before reaching, I always think of course, a strong believer in prayer. I think that's how we should start also, is praying about the communities we want to impact and to see them the way Jesus sees them. That gives us the ability to pray for them. Doing what we call here RHM, the 3 open prayers, basically opening a door to that community, opening up their hearts, and then opening up our mouths when it comes to speaking truth, but also loving on them.
That's amazing. Yeah. And you were just sharing that with me before, that you had an opportunity to do that just within your own hometown now. Could you share about your move out to where you live now and kind of practicing those principles?
Yes, on my reservation, it's great because I am not the minority. I am the main one there, the Navajos. But coming all the way to Arkansas, and I'm in Harrison, Arkansas now, which is considered the most racist town in America. It's actually where the KKK gets their mail, is the hometown, Harrison, where I pick up my mail. So it's very interesting seeing that, but also wanting to learn the culture here. I have to also adapt and not just be catered to me because I'm Navajo, but I also have to do that with other cultures. So when I came here, the first thing I want to know is, well, who are the leaders here? So we got to meet a lot of the business owners here, a lot of the, people who are running like coaches and, staff and stuff. And then we also were able to see how we can serve this community. And we've helped out, and I have the youth that I work with here that we're discipling. So we get to go to a lot of the, like soup kitchen areas. We get to go to, places where they donate clothing. We get to sort it out and we get to give them to, people who are in need of clothes. So finding a place to plug in and serve. And we also went to the Heritage Museum here in Harrison. We're able to see some of the historical stuff happening and also to know sort of the history of where we're getting into, and just to know that it was sort of a split state between Union and, the Confederate is I didn't know that. I could have easily just went off of what I've observed, and that's just a lot of Confederate flags. But even then, it's like, that's not everyone here. And there is a task force that's being developed here, or has been developed even before I got here, on adding diversity to Harrison. So I believe we are part of that diversity, being that we're adding now Native Americans to Harrison, Arkansas. And for the most part, we've just been welcomed by everyone. And it's just been great to get to know this community, to learn better how can we serve. And I get that from Nehemiah. First, when God placed a calling on his heart, he prayed. And then second, he had to, again, have an answer and a plan to the king, what he's going to do, and not just, kind of wing it, but have a plan, have a strategy. Because you might be asked by someone, and when he went, he didn't just start building right away. He observed the wall. And I believe that's like the steps that I take, is observing the community, seeing what the need is and seeing how I can help. So just plugging into the community, I think, is something me, my wife have done through the years, and it's just benefited us in ministry so much.
That's amazing. And looking as well, kind of applying it to our communities, our lives, working with other youth leaders, with teenagers, what transferable principles can you see that we need to have in working with every community, whether that's the rural, the urban, or that's the local tribes and peoples within the community that we are serving?
Um, well, I think with this, like, there's nothing new I'm going to, say here. It's all stuff that you guys have learned through the years. And I think that that's even works with, I think the transferable stuff is what can be used in Native America. What I do like about Native America, though, is that it's so rich in culture that you can't just kind of brush it off to the side. You have to address the culture. And
Mm,
so it has us in a position to start asking, well, why is this so important? And I believe culture is something that is meant to glorify God.
mm,
And, when we're able to do that, then we see, kind of why God even allows us to have culture and have, something beautiful like that.
mm,
So made in his image and him being creative, we have culture, and that is meant to glorify him back. So I believe something that's transferable is understanding the culture and seeing those redemptive things in culture that you
mhm,
can use to glorify Jesus through it. And therefore, you're not pushing aside the person's interests, and we do this a lot with youth. We see their interests and we cater to that. And the same thing I think is transferable through culture is if you
mm.
see the youth culture and you find how to translate that to Jesus, and seeing the Jesus parts in there and connecting it. I think that's very something you can do today and apply.
Mm, that's awesome. And now looking at our diverse culture and some of the divisiveness we're seeing today across communities, how do we avoid some of the pitfalls to come into connecting with somebody from a different people group, a different culture? Thinking of a youth leader coming into a network or a teenager coming into our ministry. How do we kind of avoid some of those pitfalls?
Well, I think especially for native communities, I think how to avoid a pitfall is interesting enough in the culture too. Is you don't want to get so tied in that you start getting into not glorifying God anymore, but now you're glorifying the culture and glorifying the people.
Mm,
And I've learned through the years of ministry, the limited amount of ministry that I've done, but also the extended wisdom given to me from people I've done for years, is just keeping it on Jesus.
mm,
And I think you won't go wrong. But you start talking about the political, cultural, like all those things, like too much. It's an argument you won't win. But if you keep it on Jesus, you'll never lose on that. So even for me as a Native person going to another Native community, it doesn't mean that they're going to accept me and listen to everything I have to say. They'll see me and think, "Oh, you're like me," but at the same time, you're not my tribe. So
mm, mhm,
so even then, I still have to practice. Well, how do I talk to them culturally, but also not get too fall into to these pits where I'm now, unable to get back out. And we've gone so far down that rabbit hole to where it has nothing to do with Jesus, it has everything to do with talking about debating their culture
mm,
or historical, traumas that I can't fix. So I think that's one of them is, and again, it's knowing the difference between cultures and tradition.
mm,
And I think that's where a lot of the times I would kind of be um, on the other side of people who really want to give into the traditions and
mhm,
culture. And some would even call that, syncretism is something that I've not been called to. I don't feel like I need to go further into that, but I do feel like there are things redemptive in the culture that can be used to glorify God. So you can go again. It's a very tricky area when you start seeing the culture that can glorify God opposed
mhm,
to now you have two gods you're trying to worship, your culture and God.
mm,
So and my definition of syncretism when I think of it is you take two things, God and another thing, and you try making it work for yourself, and it hardly ever glorifies the God you're trying to serve because you're trying to serve two people in that kind of way. So I just
wow.
keep it simple on things like culture, and those pits can be definitely going too far to where now you're no longer glorifying God through your culture. You now have traditions where you're doing rituals and different things that can pull you away from your relationship with God. And I only say that because I think when I take perspectives, there's something really really neat they talked about, and that was the three cultures you have. And the first one is what you're born into. Like I'll never stop being Navajo, no matter how Christian I get. I'll never be Navajo. Second will be the community that I go into is a culture I adopt. So if I'm in a Navajo community, I will adopt their culture. If I'm in a Hopi community, I will adopt their culture. If I'm in Harrison, Arkansas, I will adopt their culture. And the third one they talked about was one that never changes and probably should take precedent over the first two, and that is you being created new in Jesus Christ. Like that is your identity. That is who you are. And again, there are a lot of identifiers out there, but they're not your identity. So I have a lot of identifiers on me, even calling myself a youth worker or Navajo or a missionary, but those are just identifiers compared to my identity that I am a child of God. So again, I think that's a good way to stay away from the pits, but also, again, the going too far into the culture where it's no longer glorifying God but yourself.
Wow, that's powerful, extremely powerful. Can you share an example of how that's worked well? You were talking to me before about kind of the mission trip that some of the tribes have that you've connected with before. Can you share how things have worked well in reaching across to every community?
Yes, I feel like in most Native communities that I've gone to, and at least in the United States, what I've seen is that there is always some prophetic thing that's there even before settlers came, of an answer for where we need to go in the future. And some people will compare this to the Book of Leaves, or the son of Creator, different things like that. There are terminology that they use, hinting towards, I would say, the answer to our culture to fulfill it. And a lot of these cultures weren't able to get there due to different circumstances. And I believe that a lot of our elders back in the day had the wisdom to know that we needed something more than the sacrifice traditions that we do that only temporarily fix things that are not permanent fix and aren't so inclusive, being that it's not, again, when I wouldn't do practices from another tribe, I would only try to do my practices. But Jesus is for everyone, and it unites everyone in that way. And I think that the answer they had was for Jesus. But again, we can, some of the histories of how that was done, and I don't agree with all of it. But again, seeing that there are things that are hidden little things inside culture that God wants to use in each community, that if we just again pursued God with everything we have, that's from the Bible. If we pursue him with everything we have, we will find the answer. And I think when we settle only for tradition, we get stuck there. But if we continue to seek God, we will find him. And I think nowadays, united is through Jesus Christ that we're able to. And I always tell people, hey, like if I didn't know anything about the history that happened with, the past 400 years, and there is no one, I didn't know what white Jesus was, because that's very common on reservations, as they call him. And I just saw Jesus for who he was and what he did on the cross. The most Native American thing for me to do is to believe in Jesus Christ.
That's cool.
So I think, again, the culture is great, glorifying Jesus through it. And I've seen that on each community that we worked with. In the Southwest, it's a lot different from, the Northeast. The Northeast is a lot different from the Northwest. And then also you have Seminole down in Florida. So it's all different. And the cultures are so, different from one another that you have to approach it uniquely to each culture. But the message never changes, Jesus, and the approach of being relational and loving on them as first loving God and loving people never changes. So I think that's, how I've seen it going from reservation to reservation. And you could see, again, just those little areas that God has allowed where you can connect the dots and have these redemptive analogies in their culture so that they can see Jesus through their lens and accept them, to glorify him with their culture.
Seth, so good. And yeah, I mean, we had you on here on purpose because we know that you're Navajo, but you have there's so many tribes, and you've reached way beyond Navajo. And then to hear that you're in Arkansas now, wow. But if you're able to stay with us, what we're going to do is we're going to go into some breakout rooms, because we all live in different communities, but there needs to be a network of youth pastors, youth leaders in every community. So what can we do? What's worked? So whenever you go into these little breakout groups, what's worked for you? And then maybe some transferable principles, and then we'll come back together. And Seth, if you're able to stay with us, I at least have a ton of questions, but we can come back and share some of that. So there's some questions we're gonna talk about in breakout rooms. Thank you so much. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Seth.
Thank you.
Feel free to pause the video here and think through these questions yourself, or with the group that you're viewing this with. When you're ready, unpause to hear more of the conversation and the takeaways from the youth workers that joined us live.
Well, I'm not sure about you guys, but we had some great conversations in our small group. So what were some of those conversations that was taking place? Just unmute if you are muted and share the wealth of all those conversations. And Seth's still with us, so if something came up that I want to ask Seth this, understand our heart with NNYM, even though Seth is working among Navajo and now in Harrison, Arkansas, is we all have communities that are different than ours around us. And so how do we reach into those communities and not just get comfortable in our own? So anyway, I'll be quiet. Somebody jump in.
Hey, Paul, can you share your story about what happened in Louisville? Because I thought that was a really great story of what you shared, how you connected with one of the pastors just across the street from you.
Yeah, I was sharing a little bit about in Louisville back a couple of years ago, we had riots. And before that, I had intentionally built some relationships across racial lines. That was sort of the bigger tension in Louisville. And so the day after the riots, the morning after the riots, I simply went downtown. I went simply in the community that all of it happened and sat on the front porch with one of the local pastors. Actually went from one porch to another porch in the community with one of the local pastors and just listened and tried to understand perspective. Because from my background, I didn't get it. I didn't understand, why would you destroy your own, why would you destroy your own community? Why would you even consider that? And so he brought a lot of perspective to me in that scenario, and which was interesting because I had kids I had former youth on both sides. Like I had some that were in the police officers, and then some also who were leading Black Lives Matter. And it was a big mix for me of kids that I knew that were all over the place on that issue. And just spending the day was a great investment.
So good. Anybody else? We had a little bit of that conversation. Of course, Seth was in our group, so we got to pick his brain a little bit. But to the dignity and love, Paul, that you showed by sitting on a porch and having a conversation, when we get caught up in whatever polarization things is, rather than giving an individual dignity and love. Seth, you might want to share that just a little bit about the one that was caught blind, that Jesus picture. I thought that was powerful.
Yeah. Well, the Jesus saw a blind man who, again, he had Pharisees and different people surrounding him that would turn him into either a political, question, or even a philosophical question, or a problem to be solved. They would do all these things to this individual, But when Jesus saw this individual, he saw a person who was in need of love, and again, who can display his glory. And, doing that when we approach individuals, and I'm glad, gives them back their dignity and again, their identity and who they are in Christ, and not just the identifiers that they would say, well, I think this, therefore, we tend to take our identifiers and try to make them our identity. But our true identity, definitely is who Jesus calls us. So, that's, again, giving back the dignity, love, and seeing them the way Jesus sees them.
It's so good.
Other conversations?
Well, my hope is that each of you guys had something you took away from this conversation, whether it was small groups, whether it was the discussion with Seth, something that hit you of like, this is the one thing that I want to walk away with. And I think sometimes we can think that one thing is just for us, and we hold tight to that and walk out of this meeting. But the reality is, your one thing that you heard might be the one thing that somebody else here hasn't heard yet, and they need that too. And so I'm going to ask, and we don't do this well all the time, because a lot of times we don't want to jump in there, but write it down in the chat. Write it down in the chat, the one takeaway you have. And because, like I said, it might not be that huge for you, other than, hey, that was something I heard, but it might be the one thing God needs to say to someone else in this room. So for their sake, write down the one thing you heard in the chat today. For me, it was the one that I wrote earlier in the chat, and I don't see it now, but when Seth said that culture was meant to glorify God, that was huge for me. That's something that I could unpack for probably the next month with my community as I talk through these things, and I intend to, and I hope to. So, man, listening, that's huge. Just the idea of sit and listen, and dignity, intentionality, relationships. I need to prepare for the conversation with someone from another community. Preparing, that's huge. Kevin, you said that, yet you do that too. And we've seen that this morning, and just the fact that you put the time and effort in just to learn how to say welcome. And in a way that I don't know if I would have put that time and energy in today. So thank you for reminding us to putting the time and energy in to prepare can look practical, of learning one phrase, one word, just to say, hey, let's start this off in a respectful way as we move forward. Those are huge things that we can do. Take a look, read through this that you guys are writing. That is huge information, huge things that we can learn from each other. But I'm going to hand things off to Josiah this afternoon to kind of wrap us up.
Yeah. So in the next couple of days, we'll be sending out this recording to all of you. If you heard something, or you are wanting to understand a little more of what Seth said in his interview with Kevin, we'll be sending that out for the next couple of days here to share with you guys. But as well, another resource that you could just want to hear more from a different perspective. We do have our free refills podcast, and yesterday this was just posted. Thomas Perkeem was interviewed by our team. He is has been listed as one like the top 20 for the Fuller Youth Institute, as the top 20 Black leaders to follow in 2023. There's just a lot of good insight. What I've heard, I'm planning on listening to it even after this call, because I just want to hear from his perspective of how to reach the every in his culture. And as well, for next month, we will be having our next network conversations on April 11th on gospel advancement with Travis Deans and a special guest. That special guest will be announced at a later date. Just stay tuned for that, because I'm excited to hear more on gospel advancement with Travis Deans. But before we head off, let's pray, and we can have a discussion afterwards. But don't feel obligated to be part of that discussion. You can always leave when you want to, but yeah, we're going to be here for at least 30 minutes to discuss.
Before you pray, Josiah, really fast. Seth, thank you so much for coming
Yes.
and being part of this discussion.
Thank you.
That has been huge, and you've opened up my eyes to things that I need to focus on today. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, guys.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Nick, for saying that. Yes, again, thank you, Seth. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you and praise you for who you are. And I just pray that for the conversations that we had, for reaching the every in our community, I pray that we would just apply these things to our lives and to really go beyond our own community and to instead to build those relationships with those in different communities and to be intentional in reaching those communities as well. And I do pray that we would continue to apply those things to our lives, and that we would continue to really, again, just apply what Seth said today. And so I pray all these things up to you, in your son's holy and precious name. Amen.
Thanks for viewing this network conversation, brought to you by the National Network of Youth Ministries. We hope it helps you to set the table for unity and further conversations with other youth leaders. Any shared links are in the comment section on NNYM's YouTube channel. While you're there, feel free to like and subscribe. If you want to join our next conversation or training, you can find upcoming live events on our Eventbrite page. You can also connect to a local network leader at nnym.org. We're here because we are better together.